let's dig deeper in. Let's talk about the beginning. And when we talk about the beginning, let's focus on the time before the time before the turning point. So what got you? You said you grew up poor, and you said you got into the healthcare field because there always seemed to be. I think you said because there always seemed to be employment in that field, right?
Well, Chris, thank you for that question. And the beginning, my parents divorced by the time I was 3 because my sister passed, and they could not make it through that emotional hump for them. And so my mom, who did not have education, she was in a generation where it was common to finish high school, get married, and be a housewife. That's what she was expecting to do. So she wasn't prepared to start taking care of me and my other sister. There was 3 of us, and then there was 2 left. And so she was a bartender. She worked all kinds of weird hours, and she'd waitress, or she would just do whatever she could, but it was still not enough to really take care of a family. And that left us in extreme poverty and on social assistance and stuff.
Yeah, and that's always, it's always a bad place to be because people, and I say that because, it's people don't realize how much stress that puts on not only a body but a mind living in that deep poverty, situation. I mean, I've been homeless at different points in my life, and when it's not by choice, it definitely adds this whole other level of stress and frustration. My I've got a brother who decided he was gonna hitchhike across the country. And he's got a little bit of a rebel spirit in him, but when so he spent some time on the streets, and his time was a little bit different. It was still stressful, but it was by choice. So it was kind of, you could, he could understand. He knew he was making the choice, and he would, how can I put this? It was definitely from his telling me it was definitely less stressful than when you're put under it, not by choice. So, and also, I'm sorry to hear you had a sister pass so young. I mean, that's always a terrible thing to lose a sibling. It's just, I've known people who've lost siblings, and I know how deep that can run. So tell me, how did all of that start, how did all of that affect you, um, when and because your decision to get into healthcare, I think, was predicated on that. And
Yeah.
how did that all turn into a decision to get into the healthcare field?
All of that really helped me because I was always very loving, and I always wanted to help other people because watching my mom suffer emotionally and physically from the jobs made me want to help other people so they were not suffering. And healthcare did a few things, and my grandma had a lot to do with it because she was an LPN, and and it was just kind of like a natural transition for me.
Yeah.
And
Oh, go ahead.
oh, and I was going to say, and then the way I kind of got into deep into it is a friend of mine, my very best friend, got into an auto accident, and he had a fracture of a 4T, and he became a paraplegic. And so I started taking care of him and his family.
Yeah, and that's so great. I mean, when I say great, I mean from the standpoint that you stepped in and helped, and took care of him and his family. So you're a giver, and that's great. And it's also great to hear that you come from a line of people who were in the healthcare field. So you're in the healthcare field, and what did, by the way, what did you do? Were you a nurse? Were you a nurse's aide? What did you do in the healthcare field?
I started out with as just being a care provider, and then I built my way up to being um, the manager. From the manager, I went to being the liaison. From the liaison, I went to being a chief executive director.
Oh, okay, excellent. And by the way, you weren't just a care provider. It's funny, every time somebody says "just," I
Right.
always picture Tony Robbins in my head because he does that great routine where somebody says, somebody
Yes.
says she's just a mom and he starts screaming at her, and I can only imagine what that would feel like, standing and getting screamed at by Tony, looking up and going, okay, okay, green giant, I'm done at this point. That's, you're
Yes.
fine. I'm not just anything. Thank you very much. But yeah, so you were a care provider, and you worked your way up, which is epic, and that's what people have to realize. A lot of people will, whether it's in our industry or other industries, they want to become this overnight success, and they don't realize all the hard work that goes into building things up. Sure, you can become successful quickly. Some people do become successful quicker than others. But even if you look at somebody like an Eminem, the rapper Eminem. I mean, to a lot of people on the outside, it looked like he was an overnight success until you find out all the back alley clubs and everything he had to do to get there. So you were a caregiver. You worked your way up. Before we get to the turning point, one question I would have is: did you see yourself as always being in the medical field? I mean, did you ever see yourself leaving that field?
At the time, no. I mean, I had side businesses that were on a more holistic level. I did meditations, etc. But I never seen myself leaving it because it was my life, and I was also the co-owner of the company too. So that was my life and my company, or part company.
Interesting. So you're kind of like Steve Jobs. You started in a garage, and then you built up everything to be the co-owner to be the co-owner of the company, right?
Yes, exactly.
And it's interesting because you also mentioned, and we're going to start getting into the turning point in a minute, but you mentioned a car accident, and you mentioned a layoff. So I'll be interested to hear during the turning point how you ended up going from being a co-owner to being laid off. Because I'm looking a little confused, because it kind of does sound like Steve Jobs, where the company just says to him basically, "Hey, you're out," which is definitely not a good thing. But the interesting part is you mentioned about some side businesses, and before we talk about the turning point, because I know it's going to be applicable later on, with the side businesses, did you have a passion for those side businesses, or were they merely something that was making you a few extra dollars?
It was a passion because they were not making me money on the side. And it was really to help other people because when I started my journey and I started understanding how our thoughts and our reality create our future, I wanted to tell everybody. I, I wanted to bring people into meditations. I wanted them to understand what's the energetics. What is that? That it sounded a little woo-woo back then, and it's founded strictly in science because I always have to prove or disprove stuff. And so they didn't bring me money, but they did definitely feel my passion and help other people.
Yeah, and it filled, it's the one thing that people have to realize is we have all these buckets that we have to fill. And money is the one
Hmm.
that's talked about most often because it is the thing that allows you to live a lifestyle you want to live. It's the thing that gives you choices. It's the thing that, allows you to, do what you want to do. Unfortunately, fortunately or unfortunately, money isn't everything, and there are other buckets that people need to fill. So it's great that you had started a passion-based business that um, helped to fill those other buckets. One last question on that before we get to the turning point. Did you find that having these passion-based side products, did you find it had any effect on your business, on your main business, either positive or negative? Like, did it allow you to get through the tough times better? Did it make you realize that the business you were in wasn't your passion? Did it have any effect that you can remember on that main business?
Actually, Chris, yes, it did have a major impact on me. And doing the side business that I was doing was my passion. It really made me feel like my cup was becoming full. And so it created less stress on my regular job.
Oh, that's great. So, so one thing helped the other. So you had this, and you had a very high stress. I mean, taking care of people and running a company that takes care of people is very high stress. So you found a way to help alleviate that stress and kind of balance yourself out. And that's one of the things that people don't realize is that when you have a lot of stress in one area, you don't always have to get rid of the stress in that area. You can find something else in another area that balances it out, and all of a sudden your brain comes back to this equilibrium, and you can take things, you can deal with things longer than you would in the past. It's kind of like expectations. So anyway, enough about that before I derail this show anymore. Let's go ahead and move on to the turning point.
To watch the rest of this epic episode now, click on the link below the video. Do it now, you'll be glad you did. Are you still here? What are you waiting for? Watch the rest of this epic episode now by clicking on the link below the video.